Brilliant. So my name's Matt Ward. I'm Professor of Design at Goldsmiths and the Head of Subject for Design in the School of Design. As you pointed out, so this gives a bit of history of, to some extent, design education in the UK. So in the 80s and 90s, there was a lot of courses trying to do multidisciplinary. So what that meant really was the collapsing of 2D and 3D programs into one course. And in some way that's the genesis of where we came from, but throughout the late 90s and early noughties we started to call it transdisciplinary, because what we realized is our education was moving outside of traditional design thinking and design knowledge, and we were pulling in disciplines and influences from lots of other disciplines. And then, you know, over the last 10 or 15 years, we've been describing it more as post-disciplinary. And that's really where design starts to move into a space where it finds its home in spaces that aren't traditionally seen as design. Mm-hmm. The best articulation of how we think about design has actually got a long history to it. So this is an interview with Charles and Ray Eames when they were asked, is design a method of general expression? And they said, no, it's a method of action. So if you think about design as a way to act in the world, to plan, understand, and make material change in the world, that's about as strong a connection or as definition as we hold. So the very start of the department started in the very early 90s. And the BA design program was initially called Total Design. Now, I'm not guessing you'll know the reference to this, but in the 1970s and 80s, there was and I know nothing about football, there was a Dutch football manager called Jurgen Cruyff, and he had this concept of total football. And what that meant was that all the traditional positions of footballers on a pitch could actually take the position of any other position. So what that allowed for was a fluid and dynamic football system, which wasn't, you know, you didn't have your midfielders staying in midfield, your defenders staying in defending. So the founder of our department really rethought designers in that way. The idea that they have to be hugely flexible and actually they can wear multiple hats and need to play multiple roles as the world is changing and as design moves into different areas of public and corporate life. Soon after that, we then actually turned the course into a name, which was BA Design. Very early on, in those early 90s, we weren't quite sure if we were thinking about design in a different way or we were doing design in a different way. And then as we got to about 1998, we realized that our students really wanted to produce design and think materially through the work. So, and that's when in 98 or 97 we became the BA Design, and we've held it ever since. So the concept really, there's I've got some links here which will link to our Instagram page, and also an interview guidance document which kind of shows the kind of things that we're looking for in portfolios and interviews. So really what the course was is hoped to set out and now is achieving is really allowing students the ability to develop their own practice, but utilising the appropriate tools, techniques and methods depending on the problem that's in front of them. So that means they're not tied to a particular medium or form, and actually they can move freely throughout the 3 years in whichever way they want. What that often means for young undergraduate students is when they arrive, they're unsure of what kind of creative practitioner they want to be. So the course really gives them space and time to understand where to place themselves as they go through those 3 years. So our first year is focused on what I'd probably describe as the material realm, the bits of design that we understand, the relationships between objects and people, people and people, objects and spaces. And so we describe this as the object and the self. So developing an understanding of the object and the designer through the lens of artifact, self, user, site and situation. So really the first year is also about deconstructing the creative self, because one of the things that's really important for any creative individual is for them to understand who they are in terms of their identity, because they will design differently depending on their context. You know, you would design in a very different way from me because you're born in a different culture, you know, you're a different gender, you're a different age, and therefore your frame of reference of how you see the world will always be different. So our first year is really about trying to unpick those different social, cultural, gender and individual ideas to understand what kind of designer they are. Then the second year we expand out into the world of what I'd describe as the dark matter of the world, which is the things that we know allow change to happen but aren't as tangible. Things like the economy, politics, health and safety, all of the things that really allow the world to work, but they're the kind of soft, invisible dynamics of the world. So our first term is really about seeing design as a world-building activity, and then also a world hacking activity. So how do we start to address and change the world as is? And then the second part of the second year is all about the creative individual as a professional. So where do they want to locate themselves within the creative industries? So we start with a course called Methods and Processes, which helps students develop a CV and a portfolio, but also map and deconstruct the industry to understand where they want to position themselves. And we do that through lots of alumni talks and people showing a diversity of different journeys of, 20 years of graduates. And then the third year, and then after that we do live projects. So we bring in external companies to do negotiated briefs. So this year we do 3 a year. One of them was a BAFTA winning, a 3-time BAFTA winning TV series called The Taskmaster. One was with the Serpentine Gallery in Hyde Park, looking at the future of artificial intelligence and creative practice. And one was the architect practice Heatherwick, who designed a lot of the last year's Architecture Biennale in Seoul. So we did 3 projects with them, one around the high street, one around artificial intelligence, and one about building props for television. So there are 5 main elements, and after that students go out and do a minimum of 6 weeks work placement. So there's 5 main modules in the course. I don't really need to go through those. But as you can see here, the large pink area is really about putting the designing and responding to briefs at the centre of their education. One of the things we hold really dearly, we're the only London university that gives students dedicated studio space. And that's really for them to create a community. So it's really important for us that they spend time with each other, they work together, they learn all those soft skills of how to team build, communicate, work with others. So now there's just a couple of examples of work. So this is a lot of first year projects, and as you can see there's a real diversity of different work, from video work to electronics to graphics work to product work. This project is called Plus One, and it's where we take students to a museum in London. This year was the Science Museum, and they're given a tour by a curator, and they have to choose one collection of objects and then design something in order to add to it. So that's allowing them to understand a history of a series of technologies or objects, and then see how they can design in response to it. This is an example of a second year project. So this is one of the world building projects. This project was where we give them, it's called Serious Ramifications. So we give them an old patent, which has not gone anywhere. They're normally a little bit crazy. And we ask them to imagine the world as if the patent was the norm. So that allows them to think about the ramifications of if a technology became normalized. This is a project called The Escape. So here we're really looking at how you can think about the very real problems or legislations within the world. Because we might design the most perfect thing in the world, that if we can't allow it to get made, it won't ever come into be. So for example, the top video there of the horse, one of our students discovered that it was illegal, it was now illegal to ride horses through London, so except for under certain conditions. So what she did was start to kind of build a set of rules around these conditions to allow for a horse to come into the campus. When our students get to the third year, they bring that all together in one major project, which is defined by them. So the idea there is through the first 2 years, they're starting to understand the kind of work they want to do. And that can be fixed in a particular medium. They could be graphic designers, they could be furniture designers, or they could be speculative designers. But by the third year, what they've started to understand is where they want to go and the mediums they want to be using. And then they have to define an area of investigation and pursue that for the full year. And they do a load of work and a load of writing. And these are shows from the midway presentation, where we put on a little exhibition halfway through the year to show work in progress. So as you can see here, the work's really diverse, from large scale graphic work. This is a lot of paper and printing. This project was about imagining yourself as a fruit fly. Some really kind of wild and crazy things. There's also a contextual report, like a dissertation, but what we really put emphasis on is using writing as a creative practice. So it's not as traditional as most academic spaces. It's really getting students comfortable and confident about using writing as a way to both think about the world but generate ideas. So a lot of the publications are really beautiful. We do, in the first and second year, a series of technical studies. So we give them the kinds of skills needed to express their ideas. And that's one of 7 or 8 different types of technical studies, from graphics to image production to 3D modeling to coding, casting, textiles, a really diverse range of different stuff. This is some example of the alumni coming in and talking about their histories and their practices. And the live projects. So these are we normally go out into the world and so we go into designers' studios to present work, or into a museum if we're working into a museum. And it gives our students a real experience of what it's like to be a professional designer. So that's pretty much the MA covered, the BA covered. And then we have similar, just one program called the MA Design Expanded Practice. With the expanded practice, the way this was developed, so this has now been running, we started to write this 10 years ago. So we'd spent 20 years developing our undergraduate, but our master's programs didn't really hit the same kind of space. We were unsure about what the master's equivalent was to our undergraduate program, because we knew we'd developed a different type of practice where students were really enjoying themselves. When they graduated, they became incredibly flexible in industry, but we wanted to reproduce that, but at a master's level. So what we ended up coming up with is an idea that we wanted to appeal to students or graduates who'd come from a diverse set of programs, and that didn't just need to be design. We've had sociologists, economists in there. We've had dancers come and do the program. And really what they're interested in is utilizing design as a way to expand a practice, to move it to another level, to reposition the way they worked for a different type of world. So this is a 15-month program, as I said, open to a diverse set of backgrounds. We break it down into 6 different studios, and these studios, as you can see, have some relationship to kind of past disciplines, like communication could be seen as a graphic design and filmmaking studio, space and participation more around spatial design and environmental design, fashions and embodiment, textiles and fashion, interactions and experiments, that's more about kind of interaction design. These studios in some way are just smaller groups to allow students to share a discourse and to build a set of processes in order to answer their brief. We've got Instagram pages for all of them. They have really diverse different types of work that's produced. The MA has 3 main modules. Studio practice, which runs the whole 15 months. And that's just about students developing a practice. So in the first term, that's about loosening up and I guess becoming more risky within their practice, because we see students coming from more traditional backgrounds where they've formulated a way of working. So really we want to kind of explode that and allow for a diversity of creative practice. Transfacality is a really interesting module where our staff team turn their research projects into briefs the students come and join onto. So last year, or this year running right now, we've got 10 projects run by 20 different members of staff. So these are, every year we'll create a pack of different projects and students select which project. So, for example, part of my historic research has been working with a community with a colleague of mine, Jimmy, who runs the MA, in North Wales, in a town called Rhyl, which has got the highest deprivation in Europe. So we're using speculation and speculative design techniques to allow communities to reimagine their town. So over a 3-year period, we took our master's students up to Rhyl, and they worked with different community groups to reimagine how the town could be in the future.
My name is Chen Jun Hong.
This is a little example of some work.
Practitioner. Our project is focused on different craft skill and the material. We have one thing in common, which is we like to explore the speculative and experimental design through the physical phenomenon and the human experience and also the space. That's why we created the loop as our first project in Studio Rhythmic.
So this project they developed through a live project with Apple, and it's a clock and a light put together, and it does one full loop within 24 hours. So you start to kind of understand the time by this, how the light sits. And they've developed this into a product and installed it in different spaces. But these two are also members of staff now, so they run our workshops and labs. They're beautiful, amazing makers. So the MA really encourages a real diversity of work. So this is a group project all around different cultural interpretations of cleaning and how cleaning could be shifted through the different objects. And they designed a series of different brushes that allowed for a different type of performative action. This was a student who wanted to become a building in London, and they became the Barbican. This is a student who it was a really touching project. He was using the metaphor of the knot to make a series of different canes, and this was because his grandfather refused to use a walking cane. So he wanted to redesign the cane to allow for different kind of interactions and engagements. So this was about connection and sharing something to remove the social stigma. We have students doing kind of bodily worn things, kind of architectural scans of environments. This was a student, an Indian student, looking at different kind of cultural identities and how it's being shifted with artificial intelligence. These are some of the companies that we've done some of the live projects with. So next term we're starting one with Tencent, the Chinese company doing, we're looking at competition and collaboration through artificial intelligence within gaming. The MA has between 150 and 180 students on it. Last year that we had 1,500 applicants. In terms of application tips for the MA, and actually this runs across the BA as well, is that we're looking for really diverse portfolios. We want to see how students think. So process is really important. Sketchbooks, pictures of photography and bits of ethnography, some of their research. We really want to see how they can take a brief or an idea from start to finish. We're not that concerned about if it's really tidy. We'd like to see a bit of energy, because ultimately the portfolio is trying to present a bit of them. You know, we really need to know them and their kind of unique position on the world. And if they love stamp collecting, dance, or or they make music, all of those things are really important to us. So showing the breadth of their creative engagement and inspiration in the world is really important. So as you've seen from the work, the work's really diverse and quite wild. So most people say, but do they get jobs? The students, it's almost one of the tricks of the programs, because they're so diverse. The students become very good at moving between different types of sectors. So if suddenly product design, the jobs disappear, the students are adaptable enough to go, okay, I'll move to UX and UI design. UX and UI at the moment is suddenly crashing, so we're seeing students reposition themselves as something else. So here's a couple of examples. Jean-Luc set up his own fashion brand. Never made clothes before when he was doing the degree, but he has this kind of ability to learn really quickly. And he's got his own fashion brand, and he's producing and showing work in all of the major fashion shows. Kia worked at Dazed, so we've got anything from kind of corporate graphic design. Lauren worked at Kessler Kramer, a big advertising agency, or Pentagram, the more traditional. And we have students working at Joe Malone doing visual merchandising. Justin's worked at Lego for the last 12 years. Maria works at Arup, one of the largest engineering companies in the world. And then we also, one of the things I'm really proud of, we have students who are really entrepreneurial. So Ben, in 2011, his final year project was looking at domestic manufacture and domestic making. So he made a small scale vacuum former out of a toaster and a vacuum cleaner. But then after he left, he then made it properly, put it on the internet to gain funding, got £800,000 of funding, and that set up the company that he's been running ever since. But we also have students doing really diverse kind of print and publishing, people running their own publishing houses. Yusuf Sabri runs a series of RISO centres across Egypt. And then we have people like Neil, who was the lead designer on the London bus and is an architect. But we have people going off and becoming musicians as well. So they really move in lots of different ways. I think at the core of this is because this was, the top 10 skills from the World Economic Forum that people will need in the future. And although everybody's getting fearful about artificial intelligence taking people's jobs, at the core of it, creative thinking, curiosity, resilience and flexibility are the core things that students need to get out of the degree, and they're the things that are the base level of our education. Our studios are full, messy and lived in. Students are encouraged to be in there, make them their home and work there all the time. But it's also a place that we build community. The thing I think that I love the most about Goldsmiths is we really look after our students. We create a kind of safety net and a community for them. And we're a really tight community. All staff know all students, and staff are always around. We put on film nights, we put on karaoke evenings, and it's a real sense of community. Our labs are also really fantastic. They've got a range of different making spaces. But then when it comes to degree show time, we hire spaces in town and put on a big show. So this was in a place in Peckham called Unit 8, where we installed this enormous show with 120 students showing work. Our staff on the BA is a really diverse, interesting group of people. We have architects, people who specialise in disability, we have textile designers, we have print designers, we have interior architects, we have jewellers. So we've got this really amazing team of people on both the MA and the BA who can support a diverse range of practices. And that's it.